I didn't say a word. I just stood there in the doorway of my own dining room, holding a bowl of mashed potatoes I had spent 20 minutes making from scratch, and listened to my daughter-in-law tell her friends, in my house, at my table, eating my food, that I wasn't needed in there. "We've got it covered, Hon," she said, waving her hand like she was shooing a fly. "You can just leave that on the counter." On. She called me Han. I set the bowl down on the sideboard, walked back to the kitchen, and stood at the sink for a long moment, looking out at the backyard. At the rose bushes my husband Raymond had planted along the fence the spring before he passed. 14 of them. He counted every single one out loud the day he finished, proud as anything. Dirt on his knees, grinning up at me. I thought about Raymond a lot that evening. I think I knew, standing at that sink, that something had to change. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start from the beginning, because the beginning matters. You need to understand who I was before all of this, to understand what it meant when I finally said enough. My name is Laroon. I am 67 years old. I spent 31 years as an office manager for a pediatric clinic in Chattanooga, Tennessee, and I was good at my job. I ran that office like a Swiss watch. Scheduling, billing, staff disputes, irate parents. I handled all of it without raising my voice. Raymond used to say I could negotiate peace in the Middle East if someone just gave me a decent filing system and a cup of coffee. Raymond died 4 years ago. Heart attack, sudden, no warning. We had been married 39 years. He was the kind of man who remembered the names of everyone's children, who brought donuts to the neighbors after a hard week, who slow danced with me in the kitchen on Sunday mornings when he thought nobody was watching. After he was gone, the house felt enormous. 4 bedrooms, 2.5 baths, a wraparound porch, that big backyard with the roses. We had bought it in 1998 for $187,000, and it was worth considerably more now. I had Raymond's life insurance, my own pension from the clinic, and savings we had been careful with for decades. I was not wealthy, but I was stable. I was okay. My son Owen is 34. He is a good-looking young man, kind-hearted when left to his own devices, and entirely too easily influenced by whoever happens to be standing closest to him. I say that with love. I do, but it is the truth. He met Stacy about 5 years ago at a work event. She was sharp, quick with a laugh, knew how to work a room. I could see why he was drawn to her. At their wedding, I danced with Owen, and I whispered in his ear that I just wanted him to be happy, and I meant it completely. For the first couple of years, things were fine. We had Sunday dinners once a month, holidays together, the occasional weekend visit. Stacy was a little cool toward me, not rude, just careful, like she was always measuring the distance between us and deciding it was about right. I told myself that was normal. A lot of daughters-in-law are like that at first. Then Owen's company downsized. He was laid off in November, the year after Raymond died, right before the holidays. He called me crying, which broke my heart. I drove to their apartment that same evening with a pot of soup and just sat with them. The apartment lease was up in February. They'd been living beyond what one income could sustain. I could see that. The new furniture, the vacations, the dinners out. They didn't say any of that directly, but I am not a foolish woman. I can read a situation. I offered. I want to be clear about that. I offered. I told them they were welcome to move in while Owen got back on his feet, that I had more space than I needed and that it would do me good to have some company in that big house. Owen hugged me so hard I felt my back pop. Stacy smiled and said that was so generous. We sat down together and talked about how it would work. They would take the guest suite at the end of the hall, 2 rooms, their own bathroom, plenty of privacy. I would keep my bedroom, my sitting room, my routines. They would contribute to groceries when Owen found work. We shook on it practically. It felt like a reasonable arrangement between adults. They moved in on a Saturday in late February. By April, I was already uneasy. It started small. The way it always does, I think. Stacy rearranged the spice cabinet because she said she couldn't find anything. She moved the dish rack from the left side of the sink to the right. She replaced the hand soap in the downstairs bathroom with a brand I'm allergic to, and when I mentioned it, she apologized and said she just thought it smelled nicer. Fine. Small things. I told myself not to be petty. Then she started having her friends over, which was fine in theory. I told them both to feel at home, but the gatherings started happening 2-3 times a week. Women I didn't know, filling up my living room, using my good glasses, leaving rings on the coffee table Raymond and I had picked out together at an estate sale in Knoxville. I started eating dinner earlier and retreating to my sitting room just to have some quiet. I noticed that Stacy never introduced me when I walked through. Not once. I would come downstairs for a glass of water, and there would be 4 women sitting in my living room, and she would just keep talking, and I would become invisible. I started feeling like a ghost in my own home. Owen started working again in my part-time consulting, then a full contract by summer. I expected them to start looking for a place. I mentioned it once, gently, around July. Owen said they were saving up, that the rental market was brutal, that they just needed a little more time. Stacy didn't say anything. She was looking at her phone. In August, I came downstairs one morning and found that the framed photographs in the hallway had been rearranged. My wedding photo, Raymond and me on the steps of the church, 1985, had been moved to the very end of the hall, practically hidden. In its place was a large canvas print of Owen and Stacy's engagement photos. I stood there for a full minute before I said anything. I found Stacy in the kitchen and I told her calmly that I would prefer if she asked me before moving things. She said she was just trying to brighten up the space, that the hallway had felt dark. I said I understood, but that it was my home and I had things arranged the way I wanted them. She nodded and said of course, she didn't mean anything by it. Raymond's photo stayed at the end of the hall. I started keeping a small notebook. Nothing dramatic, just dates and incidents, written in blue ink in a little spiral notebook I kept in the drawer of my nightstand. My sister Bet thought I was being paranoid when I told her about it on the phone. "You're cataloguing your own daughter-in-law," she said. "Lorraine, that's not normal." Maybe not, but something in me said to write it down, so I did. September. They repainted the guest bathroom. I didn't know about it until I smelled the paint. Stacy said she'd mentioned it in passing and I must have forgotten. I had not forgotten. She had not mentioned it. The color was a dark charcoal gray. That bathroom had been a soft yellow for 20 years, the color I had chosen when we first moved in. October. A new sectional sofa arrived. I was sitting on the porch when the delivery truck pulled up. 2 men carried out my old sofa, Raymond's sofa, the one he used to fall asleep on during football games, and I watched it go without anyone asking me a single thing. I went inside. I said quietly that I wished they had talked to me before replacing the furniture. Stacy said the old one was worn and she thought I'd be relieved to have something new. Owen, standing behind her, said, "Mom, it's so much more comfortable, you're gonna love it." I looked at my son and I wanted to ask him, when did this become her house? But I didn't. I sat down on the new sofa and felt completely alone. November is when they asked about my bedroom. They had been using the guest suite for 9 months by then. Stacy came to me one morning, sat at the kitchen table across from me, and said there was something she wanted to talk about. Her voice was careful, the way a person's voice gets when they've rehearsed. She said the guest suite felt cramped for 2 people long term. She said if they were going to stay, it would be better for everyone if they had the main bedroom. She said I could take the guest suite, that it was really a perfectly nice space, and that they would make it comfortable for me. She said it quickly, like reading from a list. I sat there looking at her. I told her no. I said it simply, and I said it once. I said the master bedroom was my bedroom, had been mine and Raymond's for 26 years, and I was not moving out of it. I said they were welcome to stay in the guest suite, or they were welcome to find their own place, but I was not changing that arrangement. Stacy's expression shifted. Just slightly. She said she understood and left the table. 2 days later, she brought it up again. This time, Owen was there. He said it gently, said maybe I should think about it, said the guest suite. Really was nice. I looked at my son across the table and I said, "Owen, I'm not leaving my bedroom." He didn't push further. But something was different after that. The air in the house had changed. December, the holidays. My daughter-in-law invited her parents to stay for Christmas week. She did not ask me, she told me. Her mother and stepfather took the guest room down the hall, my sewing room, the one I had set up for myself when we first moved in, with Raymond's old drafting table that I used as a craft surface. Stacey had cleared it out and put in a bed and a nightstand, and when I found out, I went to Owen and I told him this had to stop. He said, "Mom, it's Christmas. Can we just not do this right now?" I spent Christmas morning sitting at my own kitchen table feeling like a visitor. Her mother was polite enough. Her stepfather barely spoke to me. But what stayed with me was the way Stacey moved through the house during that week, like she owned it, directing where people should sit, deciding what we were having for dinner, setting the table with my good china without asking, opening the good wine Raymond and I had been saving for our 40th anniversary that never came. I didn't say anything. I smiled and I helped, and I was gracious, and it cost me something every single day. January. Owen landed a significant contract, real money, good money. I waited. I thought surely now they would talk about moving. I waited all through January and into February, 1 year since they had moved in. And there was no mention of apartments, no mention of moving, nothing. In February, on a Tuesday evening, I found Stacey in the backyard with a man I didn't recognize. There were orange spray-painted X marks on 3 of Raymond's rose bushes along the back fence. The oldest ones, the ones he planted first, the big climbers that bloomed every June in that particular shade of deep red he loved. I asked her what those marks were for. She said the rose bushes were overgrown and messy, that she'd had a landscaper come out to give a quote on cleaning up the yard, and that those 3 would probably need to come out to make way for a proper patio space. She said it like she was telling me the weather. I stood in my backyard looking at orange paint on Raymond's roses, and I felt something go very still inside me. I said, "You will not touch those rose bushes." She looked at me with an expression I had not seen from her before. Not apologetic, not cautious, just flat. And she said, "Laureen, the yard needs updating. It's going to look so much better." I said, "This is my yard. Those are my roses. You will not touch them. And you will not hire anyone to do anything on this property without my permission." She said fine and went back inside. That night I sat at Raymond's drafting table, which I had reclaimed from the sewing room after her parents left, and I opened my little blue notebook and I wrote down everything. 1 year of it, starting from the spice cabinet. 14 pages. And then I called my attorney. Her name is Paulette, and she'd handled Raymond's estate for us. I told her everything. She listened for almost an hour without interrupting. At the end, she said, "Lorraine, this is your home. You have every right to ask them to leave." I said I knew that. I asked her what I should do to protect myself if things got difficult. She told me to document everything in writing going forward, to send a formal notice through her office if I decided to proceed, and to change the locks only after proper notice had been given. She also said, given the pattern I described, I might want to look into whether any of the property changes constituted damages I could pursue. I slept better that night than I had in months. March. I said nothing. I watched. I documented. Then came the dinner party. Stacey had been planning it for 2 weeks, a dinner for 8 of her work colleagues, a promotion celebration for one of her friends. She mentioned it to me on a Monday and asked if I would mind making my sweet potato casserole and maybe a peach cobbler, since her friends had heard so much about my cooking. I said I would be happy to. I spent the better part of Saturday in my own kitchen, cooking for 8 people I had never met, in service of a party I had not been invited to plan. I made the casserole. I made the cobbler. I made a pot roast because there was no main course on Stacey's list, and I couldn't watch people leave my table hungry. Saturday evening, I carried the mashed potatoes I'd added at the last minute down the hall toward the dining room, and that's when I heard Stacey's voice through the doorway. "Oh, she loves to cook," she was saying, laughing a little. "She'll just drop things off and head back to the kitchen. She's sweet." "She'll just drop things off?" I walked into the doorway with the bowl. The table was full, 8 people, all of them younger, all mid-conversation. Stacey looked up at me and smiled and said, "We've got it covered, Hon. You can just leave that on the counter." The room kept talking. No one looked up. No one said thank you. I set the bowl on the sideboard, walked back to the kitchen, and stood at the sink. I looked out at the rose bushes. The sky was just going dark, that particular shade of blue that Raymond loved when he used to say the day was putting itself to bed. And I thought about what I was teaching my son by staying quiet. I thought about what I was teaching myself. I went to my sitting room. I did not eat dinner that night. I sat in Raymond's old armchair and I made a list on a notepad of everything I was going to do, starting Monday morning. Monday, I called Paulette. She drafted a formal 60-day notice to vacate, sent certified mail and hand-delivered. Legal and proper. I texted Owen at the same time so he wouldn't be blindsided. He called within minutes. "Mum, what is this?" "It's exactly what it says, honey. I need my home back." "You're serious?" "I've never been more serious in my life." He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "I need to talk to Stacy." I said, "I know you do. But Owen, this decision has already been made." They hired a lawyer. I had expected that. Their attorney sent a letter claiming they had established tenancy rights and could not be removed on 60 days' notice given the duration of their stay. Paulette was not surprised. She had seen it before. What Stacy's attorney did not know, what Stacy herself may not have fully considered, was my notebook. 14 pages had become 32 by then. The painted rose bushes, the sofa, the photograph, the bedroom ask, the guest bathroom, the sewing room, the Christmas wine. I had dates, I had details, I had photos I had quietly been taking on my phone for 3 months. And I had a $4,200 receipt from the flooring company that Stacy had hired, without my knowledge, to refinish the hardwood in the guest suite hallway, a project I only discovered because a neighbor saw the van and asked me about it. Paulette added property damage to the filing. The mediation session was in May. Stacy came in wearing a blazer, very composed, very ready. I wore the blue dress I had worn to Raymond's retirement party, the last one we went to together. I sat down at the table across from her and I thought, I managed that pediatric clinic for 31 years. I handled difficult people every single day. I am not afraid of you. The mediator asked Stacy directly whether she had made permanent modifications to the property without the homeowner's consent. She said she believed I had given general approval for improvements. I opened my folder. I had printed out text messages, none of which contained any approval from me. I had the flooring invoice billed to my address without my signature. I had the contractor quote she'd requested for the rose bushes. I had the photograph of Raymond's sofa being carried out to the curb. The mediator looked at the folder. Then he looked at Stacy. The outcome was this. They vacated by the end of May. Stacy agreed to pay $6,800 to cover the flooring restoration and the repair of 2 window casings she had painted shut during one of her improvement projects, something I hadn't even realized until the contractor came through. They signed. I signed. It was done. Owen and I did not speak for 6 weeks. Then one Sunday morning in July, he showed up at my door alone. No Stacy. Just my son standing on my porch looking like he hadn't slept well in a while. I opened the door. He said, "Mom, I'm sorry. I'm sorry." I let him in. I made coffee. We sat on the porch, the same porch Raymond and I used to sit on every Sunday morning with the newspaper, and Owen told me that the marriage had been struggling, that he had known things were off but hadn't wanted to see it. That watching the mediation had clarified a lot of things for him. I didn't say I told you so. That is not who I am. I said, "You are my son and I love you and none of that has ever changed." He cried. I handed him a napkin from my pocket because I am a mother and I always have a napkin. The rose bushes bloomed that June, the way they always do. All 14 of them. That particular shade of deep red that Raymond loved, the color he had searched 3 different nurseries to find. Back in the spring when he was still here. When this house was still full of the 2 of us, the way we had always meant it to be. I cut one and put it in the small blue vase on my nightstand, the one that's been there since 1998. I sat in the quiet of my own room, in my own house, and I felt something settle back into place. This is my home. It has always been my home. And I will not be made a guest in it again. I think about that bowl of mashed potatoes more than I probably should, not because it was the worst thing that happened. It wasn't, not by a long shot, but because it was the moment I finally saw things clearly. Standing in that doorway, invisible in my own home, I understood that what I had been calling patience was actually something else. It was erasure, slow and steady, and I had been letting it happen one small thing at a time. What I've come to understand is that actions have weight. Every time I said nothing when something was moved, replaced, or decided without me, I was sending a message that this was acceptable, that I could be managed, that my silence meant consent. And Stacy heard that message loud and clear. I don't say that to excuse what she did. I say it because understanding how we get somewhere is the only way to make sure we don't end up there again. The notebook saved me, not in a dramatic way, just in the quiet, practical way that clear thinking saves you. I was not acting from anger when I called Paulette. I was acting from evidence, from 32 pages of dates and details, from a mind that had been paying attention even when my mouth had been staying quiet. That notebook was an act of intelligence before it was ever a legal document. It was me deciding that the truth of what was happening deserved to be recorded, that it was real, that it mattered, that I was not imagining it, and I was not overreacting. There is something nobody tells you about being a generous person. Generosity requires the other party to receive it with some kind of care. When it doesn't, when someone takes what you offer and then reaches for more without asking, continuing to give is no longer generosity. It's just loss. I had to learn that at 67 years old, standing at my own kitchen sink, looking out at my dead husband's roses. What I'm most proud of, and it took me a while to let myself feel proud rather than just relieved, is that I never stopped being who I am. I didn't rage. I didn't become cruel. I documented. I consulted. I followed the proper steps, and I held my ground with the same steadiness I had used to run that clinic for 3 decades. I was not a doormat, but I was also never a bulldozer. There is a version of strength that doesn't require you to become someone you're not, and I held on to that. Owen and I still have Sunday coffee on the porch when his schedule allows. We don't talk about that year very much. What I notice is that he listens differently now. To me, to himself. That is worth something. Raymond's roses bloomed again this spring, all 14 of them. Deep red, the particular shade he drove to 3 nurseries to find. I cut one and put it in the blue vase, and I sat with it a while. This house held a whole life, it still does, and I am still here.